This is another episode of Reflections, and I'm here with Snappi, the in-game leader of Heroic. And a lot of people may not know this because people only really got to know you in CSGO in Heroic, actually, and in Team X, which is basically Heroic, before you joined the organization. But you've been playing a long time, actually. Like, in the 1.6 days, obviously, you were around then. But the first time I actually heard of you was, I remember you were playing around we used to, in 1.6, we used to call it like the semi-pro scene. That's what we used to describe when, like, in most big countries, there'd be like one or two teams could have, like, the full sponsorship, go to every big LAN, all the best players play for those teams. But then there would always be those teams, depending on how well the country did, where in Sweden, maybe it'd be like, the third, the fourth, the fifth best team. In Denmark, at this point in time, it was actually like the second, third teams, there was only really like the big MTW type teams that were the huge ones. And you were playing for these teams, and then what happened was the main way fans would see you, I remember, was Intel Extreme Masters. A lot of people in CSGO won't know this, actually used to be an online league, and then it used to lead into the big European Finals and then a big World Finals, a bit like what we have now in terms of Katowice being the World Finals, but it wasn't just all LANs only. There was online play that led into that, kind of like EPL now, I guess. That's probably the best example to give. And so this is where we'd first see people like you playing. So I remember when I saw your team qualify for this tournament, it was the IEM IV European Championship. It was the beginning of 2010. You were in this team called Roskilde Ravens. And when your team qualified for it, I've got to tell you straight up, okay, back then, me and a bunch of other pro players, I mean, I'm not a pro player, but you know what I mean, like people who I talked to, we always used to criticize the IEM format because it did work around online play. Therefore, if you were in a vaguely central region like Denmark, Germany, by default, they usually got pretty good server ping, and so it wasn't a coincidence that, oftentimes you would get like the second best Danish team would qualify for this European Masters. You would get like sometimes the second or the third German team would have a chance to. But as a result, most people are expecting, okay, but when they go to the LAN, they're going to do badly. They're going to be the last place teams. And this is usually what happened, okay? So when your team qualified for this LAN, people didn't really expect anything from you. And in fact, if you go back and you look at the group that you were put into, you were in one of the most stacked groups, actually. You were in the group that had like the Poles, you had Neo and Taz, etc. You had SK Gaming guys, you had Mouse Sports who just added Roma. So you were actually in the group where, funny enough, I mean, this is obviously going to tie into the story later on. It feels to me like this is like the same story as what happens with Heroic at this kind of Vite tournament now, because you're in the group where it's obvious who the three teams that should get out be, the big name teams. And you did kind of a similar thing. You shocked people. You had these upset wins over teams and you got out of the group stage, and actually you also made top four at that tournament. So what this must have been kind of like a breakout tournament for you. I mean, did it come out of nowhere for you as well?
Okay. This time or back then?
In the one 2010.
The 2010 one, yeah, that was a surprise even for us. Back then we felt like we were underrated, but we weren't on the level that other teams were at that point. I think every player on that team performed at that event, and that's also why we were quite unlucky not to go first in that group, because I remember we threw away a 15-8 lead against MIM back then, yeah, which would have made us fall, and then we ended up losing to SK, so we instead placed second. It was a surprise for us back then as well, because we were in a quite good group, and I don't think that we had good players, but we didn't have the talent to maybe be on that kind of level. And also back then, it was the scene was not as professional as now. Everyone on that team were, not everyone, but at least me, Friis, and City, and Turkish actually. I think everyone was doing school or work. I think a lot of teams were back then, but we weren't playing professionally at all, and we didn't get salaries back then. So we kind of just did it for like fun. So even placing top four at that event was, it was a surprise for us.
when something like that happens and you get like sort of your first really big chance to go to a big international tournament, and you know, I mean, coming into it, you know, maybe you hope that you can do well, but you have to be realistic. You know, you got to figure like, okay, maybe we won't do well. You know, like, I mean, you see a lot of teams, there's like a learning curve. You know, you got to lose to a few times to some of these teams. Some of your players kind of sometimes have to lose to get kind of used to playing offline, you know, and kind of get into the game. So is there something surreal about when you went to this LAN and suddenly you were beating all these like huge name teams? I mean, in the third place decider, which admittedly, you know, sometimes those games didn't matter to some people, but you beat SK Gaming in that one. You know, these were big name players that you must have seen and known with you know, huge names in the scene.
I mean, we actually had before that beat some of the best Danish teams on LAN in Denmark, and we had really solidified ourselves as number 2, I suppose. So we were quite convinced that we could beat these teams, but on such a consistent level that we did that event were surprised for us. We also had been to the Arbalet event.
Yeah.
A few months prior, and we went out 0-3, but we made a big mistake back then because we thought our Inferno was good, so we played it twice in a row and lost 3 times in a row. So we had the experience of being at an international event, but I don't really think back then it wasn't really that much about experience because, yeah, you were playing the best teams on LAN, but you weren't playing on stages, so... Okay. At both the Arbalet and the European Arbalet, you were playing at an internet cafe up in Sweden, and the European Finals were played in
somewhere in Germany, right?
Somewhere in Germany.
Yeah.
They weren't in the audience. No. At least the one that were it was very little. So yeah. So I mean, you didn't get nervous to the same extent as you maybe expect some players to do now on stages. Okay.
So one of the interesting things that I do remember noting, though, was that one of the changes in your team was that you were able to get Friis to come along. And for this tournament, he actually officially, I remember, was just like saying he was a stand-in, you know, because he had been around the scene. He'd kind of been at the top end of those teams just below the MTWs, you know, and people clearly knew, though, you know, this is a guy with talent, you know. I mean, I remember he was kind of the same class of players that was like, you know, Trace was coming up, there was Friis, there was a few names, Carrigan, obviously, is another one. There was a few names that were around at the time, and in 1.6, people won't know this who've only seen him in CSGO, unfortunately, but in 1.6, there was a time in the years following this where he was one of the best AWPers. So I wanted to ask you this, since you played with him a bunch, and obviously last year in CSGO, for some reason, he never seemed to be that kind of player. I mean, he never seemed like the star player or that kind of AWPer even. What do you think about 1.6 Friis compared to CSGO Friis?
Back then at the European Finals, it weren't actually him. It was a team performance. Later on, he was being a much bigger carry, if you can say that, for our team. But I remember that exact tournament. We were like 4 frags apart, me, Turkish, SETI, and Friis. So that was more like a team performance. But I believe the biggest difference between 1.6 and CSGO Friis is confidence and the ability to wanna like do shots everywhere, and the other one, which is probably the biggest hinder he got, is that in 1.6 he was like a god with no scoping, so he could, even if he missed a shot, he would most likely get out of that situation due to him being so good on close range. And in this game, Friis doesn't really no scope. Because it's random. So therefore, I mean, you have to no scope even though it's random, but he tends to scope all the time. And in 1.6 that worked out because he could basically just no scope people. So I think actually I think it's sad that you can't no scope because it takes some of the skill away from the AWP, but it certainly hinders Friis in his ability on close range.
Okay, so the sad thing about this story, that you had this really great run at the IEM, is that people always want to be like, oh, don't call it a fluke, don't write them off, you know, but it kind of was, right? Because after that, you guys went to a lot of tournaments over the next couple of years, and you had like a similar core of people, you know, Z, Berry, those guys were still around with you a lot of the time, but you never were able to have the same kind of results again. Like, how do you explain that? What's your take on it?
I mean, I think people were it's hard to keep up with people like doing it full time when we weren't doing that at all. I mean, back then I think I had between 20 and 40 hours past 2 weeks. That was like normal. Also, I believe that we had some good results, but we just never had like at the IEM European Finals, the first event we went to. Everything kind of every match we had the marginals on our side, I suppose. But at the other events, we went out on round difference and stuff like that. It wasn't like it was obviously at the World Finals a couple of times we went out 0-5, 2 times actually I think. But at other events, DreamHack events and other events we attended, we went out on round difference on several occasions. So yeah, I think the marks weren't on our side.
Okay, so how does that affect you mentally, though? Because, I mean, when you're in a team like in this kind of a scenario, in 1.6 especially, people really did just go off results. Like I always used to say, the easiest way to get into the team that's like above you in your country is you have to be able to like upset them a whole bunch, or you have to place ahead of them. If you do that instantly, you know, suddenly those guys respect you, they'll bring you into play. You see this in the history of like star players when they come up, okay? But I've always said one of the hardest things is if you're, I mean, we didn't really use the term support player that much back then, but if you were one of the support players or the in-game leaders, those are the guys actually who were kind of trapped, because they're going to take the star player from your team, and then your team's going to get a bit worse for a while. And then usually even the players they have as their kind of support players are usually pretty good players, you know, like in some of the SK teams, you know, they'd even have like star players would be like that. So it was often very hard. I mean, I remember in the Swedish scene, players like Threat and Pronox, they were kind of just trapped, you know, they could never get out of the third and fourth best teams, because the in-game leader is usually the leader of the, in the like traditional sense, the leader of the big team, and he's not going to replace himself with someone else, you know. So when you had these like this run where you could never get the big results again, like did you ever think to yourself like, maybe this is just all what CS is going to be, you know, and maybe I can never go past this level? Were you able to keep like motivation to play?
I mean, back when I played 1.6, I had motivation to play, but the thing was that again, I weren't seeing it as a job in any way. I had jobs on the side. I had school, so I was doing so much in the summer. Even from June to August, I didn't play at all because it was the summer. So I didn't have a professional mentality at all. So yeah, I wanted to go to MTW, but I mean, I also kind of knew that it wasn't really realistic, because the commitments we made weren't really good enough to even be there, I suppose.
Okay. So one of the players I referenced before, who was a long-time teammate of yours, was Berry. You played with him in pretty much most of the 1.6 lineups, and then people won't know this, but you actually played with him in some of the CSGO lineups as well, as recently as like a couple of years ago. What was he actually like as a player? Like, how would you describe him? What was he like as a player?
Barry was actually in 1.6. He was a really good caller. I think he were a better caller in 1.6 than CS:GO. He was like, actually Barry had insane aim, and people don't know about this, but none of us on the Ravens team, or I think anyone I knew of, could beat that guy on aim maps. But somehow it never really translated into like the server when we played officials. At least not to the point where he actually was insane. I don't know if he got nervous or whatever the problem. Maybe the calling actually affected him a lot more than what we knew of. But he had insane aim. I mean, I remember that Excel frag side. I mean, he were just beasting in there. So he was a good teammate. He was a good caller. He was good at doing like mid-round calls, stuff like in 1.6. You could just basically ask. Back then I was playing the side, so then he would just ask me, or Turkish back then, can you try to like work the side, get a pick, and then we'll go out that. That was a lot of the times that were actually the mid-round calls in 1.6, where in CSGO now it's a lot more about the tactical aspect, utilizing your smokes, molotovs, and flashes. So being the in-game leader back in 1.6, it wasn't easier, but it was at least different.
Okay. So I remember there was one tournament that you played. It was towards the end of 1.6. It was like a DreamHack Winter where you actually got Trace as a stand-in because MTW had basically like half of them had retired, and like the team was done, and he just wanted to play still a little bit. And actually, at the time he was looking for what team he was going to join. And next year he initially went to actually SK, and then he went to Fnatic. So for people who don't know, Trace was basically like probably the best Danish player ever, if you have to pick a player. And we're talking about like in terms of skill as well, not just like, most accomplished or whatever. You only got to play with him a little bit here, but what was he like as a player? And obviously you were around him a long time in terms of the Danish scene. Like, was the hype justified around this guy?
Yeah, it was. He was by far the best Danish player when I played. I only played towards the latter years of CS, and from when I came and played like on a professional level, I suppose you can't even call it professional because we didn't earn a lot.
Yeah.
But, I mean, yeah, he was the best Danish player by far because the way it wasn't really. He had insane aim. That's the first thing, and then he never made stupid decisions. Like he never hunted for eco frags, and a lot of players also back then and now in CS:GO does that, and it haunts their teams sometimes. But Trace never ever did that, and he just held his angle, and he was the best at holding angles in the world.
So one of the things that is actually always cited as like a tragedy is the fact that he did play CS:GO. He played it for about like, let's say like 8 months or something. And it's like exactly the time he left was when players who had that style of play were basically like you use the angle to get your kill. And he just did. Thing is, normally players who did that, right? A lot of the 1.6 players who had that style, I understand why they didn't transition over well, because usually they did that to kind of use their brain to win the round because their skill wasn't as crazy. But he was like the guy who had the skill and the brain and therefore like, was very dominant. It feels like he left at exactly the wrong time. Like if he stuck around even 6 months more, my theory always was, surely someone this good could have adapted to CS:GO. What do you think?
Yeah, he should. He could have played at a professional level. I'm 100% certain of that. I think he tilted. I suppose that you could play this dumb in CS:GO and still benefit from it. He was used to a style in which you were basically, whenever you got in an advantage, you went into crossfires on the sides. One guy standing with a pop flash, something like that. And then you were basically just going to shut it down using angles. And in CS:GO, people were just pressing W, AD, stuff like that. So I think he actually tilted that the game were like it were.
Okay. So when we came into CS:GO, now, I have to say, for many years in CS:GO, like I've always been a bit of an elitist, right? I mainly just watch like the big LANs, and then if I have extra time, I'd rather watch like the best teams. I'd watch their match over again, So I never really follow like the teams that are like competing in the online part and then don't make the LAN and stuff, So I didn't actually know for a long time that you were even competing in CS:GO because, I mean, I wouldn't watch the qualifiers where like a Zapso or Copenhagen Wolves was playing, But when I went back and looked it up, you were playing with like a similar group of people for a bunch of years. You had like obviously HUNDEN, SMF, these guys, and then you had people like Friis at times in your teams. You had Berry at one point in time. So eventually Glaive came along. So how were you able to compete for so many years in CS:GO? Again, in a scenario where, I mean, there's not much fame coming from it. You're probably not making that much money. Was CS:GO a fun enough game to make it worthwhile in that sense?
I didn't play CS:GO actually. I mean, I played it, but when CS:GO came out, I got like 500 hours playing in the start of, I guess, 2013. And then I quit for 2 years. I mean, I didn't have a PC. So when I came back, I was asked on Facebook. I mean, I started playing a little bit in 2015. Then I was asked to attend with Copenhagen Wolves for some ESL event in Copenhagen Games.
Okay.
So I went back with like 0 hours at all, and I played, and I didn't play good at all. And then I was still doing my bachelor at that time, so I finished my bachelor in the summer of 2015. So at that point, I started playing a little bit more, and in the I suppose late 2015, I decided that I wanted to try to make a full-time comeback. So I started like grinding the hours again. And I started playing with Barry, Glaze, Lommer, and SMF, I think. Maybe not. No, Holst.
Holtz.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then a few months, a few months after that, I were asked to come to Copenhagen Wolves with Glaive, me, HUNDEN, SMF, and Percy, and we made that lineup, which later transitioned into us picking up Valde, and then later on, Valde, Glaive, and then me being picked up by Team X, which were, being heroic. So the reason why I weren't like around was back in 2013, I had offers from some of the best teams in Denmark, but I decided that CSGO wasn't worth it at that time. I actually didn't think it would evolve to this stage. So I came back because I saw what the scene had become. And I remember when I was like, I think I was 21 or 22 back then when I basically hung up the mouse. But I felt like this isn't worth it. I need to get my education done now. I need to do my bachelor and my master. So that's really why I quit and left the scene. So, yeah.
Okay. So you referenced before when you were playing with Berry, like he was the in-game leader. One of the interesting details as well that a lot of people don't know. Okay, I mean, first of all, this sounds crazy, but a lot of people didn't even know until recently that you were the in-game leader of Heroic. They assumed Glaive was because, I mean, I guess it makes logical sense if they didn't follow the team. You know, Glaive used to be an in-game leader in Western Wolves. Obviously, he is the in-game leader now in Astralis. He's fantastic at it. But people didn't know. Okay, not only were you the in-game leader here, but that was actually kind of your first big attempt to be the in-game leader. You know, before that you had like HUNDEN with you, and obviously you had Berry before that. So what's weird is, in that sense, your career reminds me a bit of what's happened to MSL, where he used to be like, you know, considered like the support player of a bunch of teams, but he played with good in-game leaders, and then eventually he got to the teams where he was like, right, I'm gonna have to take over doing this role, and he became very good at it. So people will look back and assume he always did it. What was it actually like playing under guys like HUNDEN? Like, was it? I mean, obviously you had Glaive as well at the same time, but I think he wasn't the in-game leader at all at that point, right?
No, we weren't. The thing is, I actually might think that HUNDEN is the best Danish in-game leader in terms of leading. Well, I think that for sure, actually.
Okay.
But the thing is, he don't have the individual level. As in Wolves, me, Glaive, and HUNDEN played together, and me and Glaive were actually the top fraggers by far in that team. So, I mean, we proved that we could frag, but, I mean, doing in-game leading, it just takes a lot, and it wasn't against Taiwan teams also. That's another thing to note. But I played the AWP in Wolves, so for me, transitioning into being the in-game leader and leading was actually... in Wolves, we decided to cut HUNDEN and Percy. And then me and Glaive discussed which of us was going to in-game lead, and we decided that it was going to be me, so he could keep he was an entry fragger in the teams I were playing, so he could focus on that part still, and then I would just try to take on the in-game leading role, because we picked up Mertz and Auber to take over the AWPing role, since I felt like I couldn't do good in-game leading in the AWP role. So that's really how it went. But I remember when I played in Copenhagen Wolves, at the start I was like, back in 1.6 I was doing some mid-round calls and trying to help out Barry.
Okay.
But I remember when I joined Copenhagen Wolves, I maybe had just reached 1,000 hours in CSGO in the start of 2016. So I were always trying to like change up things, change up tactics, change up the way that that I thought we should approach the game. And at one point, HUNDEN and Glaive actually told me that just focus on your AWPing, and we are going to do the mid-round calls and stuff like that, because having three guys like doing mid-round calls, trying to give input is too much, especially when you got HUNDEN, which were doing a lot of in-game leading, and also Glaive giving a lot of input. So me, like, without any proper CSGO experience, trying to like chip in were too much. So in all the teams I played with Glaive, he were like the secondary caller, if you could say that,
Okay.
on helping the in-game leader out. And he was also that in Heroic when we played together. And yeah, he was like amazing to have for me. because whenever I didn't really know what to do, we basically had an agreement that I would do the in-game leading like every round, and when Glaive wanted to do in-game leading, he could help out, but I would have the final say. So if I were like calling, let's do this, and Lucas was saying, let's try to do a B execute. If I agreed, which I did, like 90% of the time would say, let's do it. But if I disagreed, we had an agreement that I would always have the last say. And he respected that throughout the whole time. So he was really easy to play with.
Okay, so when you said that comment about HUNDEN, now the problem with HUNDEN is this is a guy who, you know, he's obviously played in Source, etc., and people only know him now because of the meme that they think he's like the worst player ever or whatever. And here's the thing: yes, statistically, he's had some pretty terrible games in his career. But I've actually heard exactly what you've said from a bunch of people in the Danish scene, not even just only people who played with him, you know, and are friends with him, that they say that he's actually a very good leader in terms of like setting up a team and knowing what to do. So what do you mean when you say to you he's actually the best leader? Like, what qualities does he have as an in-game leader?
He was just really good at making everyone comfortable in their roles. And that's also what the biggest thing I learned from him is I learned the value in CSGO of having like amazing strats, because every strat HUNDEN makes is quite fucking good. And then I also learned the value of having every player feeling comfortable in their role. So HUNDEN he's not the best at mid round calling or anything like that, but he's the best at setting up a team, setting up a playstyle, and then setting up roles so that the team will function. He could get he wouldn't be forced to have the best players in the world in order to have a team that could like compete, because he's really good at setting it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about the fact that you played with Glaive, and as we mentioned, he wasn't the in-game leader. Okay, he was playing the kind of secondary caller role, and maybe if he saw something interesting, he'd make his point. This is one of the only ways I actually kept track of some of the Danish scene, was since I remember how good Western Wolves were, and at the time they were actually one of the teams I liked to watch the most, because I was like, some of those, like, they weren't like Astralis, okay? They didn't have like all the best players, and then you put tactics into it. It's like they actually had a team where, you know, they didn't have that many great players, you know, but they just had a great team and they had a great tactical approach. And so in the years after that, okay, people like Pimp, Nico, you know, they were still around the top end of the scene. And every time I saw them, I would always ask them, like, what the fuck is Glaive doing now? Like, is that guy is he dead? Like, where is he? And they would always make it sound like, they almost made it sound like he was like off in the wilderness, like some mad monk or something, you know, and he was never going to come back, and like, oh no, he doesn't even like taking game lead anymore, and yeah, you know, no one knows like mentally where he's at anymore, and they made it sound really crazy, like we're never going to see Glaive again. So when he came back in these teams and I heard, oh, he doesn't even in-game lead anymore, I thought, okay, well, I mean, still a decent player, but probably never see him at the top level again. Does it surprise you that now, I mean, a lot of people now, I saw Fallen said this on Twitter actually, are calling him the best in-game leader in the world. Like, what do you think, where do you think his head was at, that he didn't want to be the in-game leader of these teams, and then now he seems to have fully embraced it again? What is your take on it?
I think it was actually, as you said before, you won't get picked up if you don't frag, and I also realized that. So in Copenhagen Wolves, I just fragged. A lot of things. When people are looking at games, they're always looking at the scoreboard. So sure. I think that Glaive felt like he couldn't do. I think he knew that he couldn't put out the frag output he wanted if he were to in-game lead.
Okay, but when he was doing like the secondary calling with you, is there a specific type, like kind of scenario in which he'd do a call, like as a certain sort of like a. In what sense? Like, give us an example of what a Glaive input might be.
Okay, me, Friis, and Glaive, we would be the ones taking map control. So let's say we were playing overpass, and MODDII would go towards B, and valde would go underground. Then I would call, let's do one of our standards. We would take mid control, we would take bathroom, we would take short and long on A, and then when I was about to like call out, let's do one of our A executes, after we cleared all of that and the CTs went defensive, he could like since he were like the first guy in at that point, he would be like in front of me. He could maybe hear a rotation coming from B to A, and then he would call, "Let's go B instead. Let's go rush underground." And then I would maybe say, "MODDII throw a smoke on upper on B," and then we would just rush straight out to B. That's something. That's one of the mid-round calls that he would usually make. That actually most of his mid-rounds call would be like rotating from the side I initially had the plan to go to.
Okay. So one of the most bizarre things about when I've seen him play in Astralis now is I'm actually quite used to people who are like really tactical in-game leaders, sometimes taking up being the entry fragger role. I mean, back in the day, Existence used to do it in very games, and obviously MSL most famously does it recently, but they do it in a sense of like, usually they do it to give comfort to like whoever the star player is, who's like the other entry player. And it's more like, you know, they run in first, they get info for that guy, they draw attention, and they're kind of setting up their star player. Like, okay, I'm gonna make you comfortable, okay? But as a result, you usually think, okay, it's fair enough if that guy just dies, you know, it's gonna be very hard for him. He's the in-game leader anyway. But what blew my mind when Glaive joined Astralis is he was doing that, but then he would like actually be fragging the people at the same time. Like, what do you think of what he's done in Astralis as an in-game leader?
I think he actually brought most of the heroic playstyle to Astralis, and then he put on his own twists.
Okay.
I mean, we basically, I think the biggest reason that he succeeded was that they lost trust in Kerrigan, I suppose. And then when he came, everyone believed in the strats. So if everyone believed in the strats, they're going to work better. And also, Glaive is a pretty good individual player. He's not a star level player, but he's certainly good enough to like be an in-game leader that can frag. So I think I don't ever think that he uses himself when he goes in first. He allows his teammates to trade him, but I don't think he doesn't go in first just to get traded. He goes in first to like get the kill and then get traded afterwards. So I think that he had a lot of. I think our fundamentals coming from Coming Wolves and HUNDEN, and then later on in Heroic, which we built together. I think he brought that along to Astralis, and that was like something new for the Astralis guys that everyone believed in, and therefore it succeeded so well, and also exceeded probably their own expectations because they've been like a solid number one since he joined almost.
Yeah. So, okay, if we rewind a little bit and we talk about like Team X going into the heroic era. So the reason why I actually think the success that this team had was so surprising to me is because if you actually looked at the lineup, like if you were being really brutal, okay, the lineup would go like this. So you'd gotten Valde like, you know, like a little bit beforehand in Copenhagen Wolves, but you know, no one had really seen you at like big tournaments. So when the lineup for Team X was like Snappi, okay, vaguely remember that guy from 1.6, like he's been around in CSGO, okay. Got Friis and MODDII, like Friis was considered like a bit washed up, you know, like people in that SK team thought, yeah, he wasn't that great. MODDII was like, okay, he'd actually had a bit of like a revival at this point in time. He'd had a couple of good months in SK, so he's okay, but again, I mean, people think like he's kind of trapped out of the Swedish scene, you know, because unfortunately all that stuff with his reputation and history. Glaive, as I mentioned, you know, it's like, if he's not the in-game leader and he's this guy from a few years ago, okay, all right name, but is he ever going to be at the top level again? People probably thought no. So then when you brought in this Valde guy, no one knew him. You know, this guy had barely played at all. It's not like he went through the normal route, you know, where you play like tier 3, then you go to tier 2, and you keep impressing, and gradually you get that tier 1 call-up. How the fuck did you find this Valde guy? Because he obviously literally turned out to be like the star player of the team.
It was actually Glaive. Back in Wolves, me and Glaive were discussing which players we were going to play with. And Glaive insisted that we should try out Valde because I think they have like a common friend from somewhere that they didn't meet in CS, and then he had played with Valde and Faceit, and I think he was really impressed by his playstyle. So we just decided to test out him and Mertz, and Valde made the cut. And also we tried to make him our star player because we all knew that me and Glaive were always going to try to set up other players, and because we came to that point where if this team has to work, we basically have to like try to do the best for our new guys. So we set up valde in bait setups, and then another thing that really surprised me about valde is it isn't necessarily his aim that is like godlike or anything, but he's just so good using his utility. So he's really good at like he's a smart player in the sense that if you bait for him, he will usually get you 2 or 3 kills from that position. So we set up a lot of bait setups, and then also he was pretty damn amazing at using smokes, molotovs, and flashes like mid-round in retake situations and stuff like that. So he won us some clutch situations that we probably shouldn't win at points.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that actually has really shocked me from watching him play, is when I first saw like scoreboard numbers that he was having, I started watching the game and I'm thinking, right, usually when a player comes out of nowhere like that and they have big numbers, usually it's just they have insane aim, you know, like it's like some mad fragger. So I'm thinking, right, and then I'm not actually seeing any of that when I'm watching the game. But what I noticed was he was super fundamentally sound, you know, like a lot of really, it's like his intuitive sense for the game, very good. So normally that's kind of like bizarre that a player would come out of nowhere and have that kind of skill set. Was any of it like how you put him into the system in the team and where you put him? Like, did he have any say in where he wanted to play and what he wanted to do? How did that aspect work? Because when you're surrounded by veterans and then you can kind of, it can work that well, I have to figure it has something to do with it.
I believe that he was set up well. I think the only real bad spot he had was B Mirage, but even on Mirage, we set him up in baits every time we did a stack on A or stack on... Yeah, somewhere we would be baiting for him, and he were the guy who would be pulled over. So, I mean, it probably weren't as bad as holding like B just 15 rounds in a row. But I think he got some great spots, and then also we had a lot of confidence in the fact that he were able to frag, and also he weren't the guy that seemed to get like nervous or anything when we went to events. So he would perform even though he didn't have a lot of experience. So actually, it's the way that I think it's different from, let's say, 1.6 when I joined some of the better teams. Back then, you would just basically be handed all the shit spots because it would usually be the worst player who would be kicked, and you usually have the shit spots. So I think the difference now is that when the Danish team pick up new guys, they put them in the good spots, like to gain confidence. At least that's what I do, and also that's what I see on other teams, that some of the like older players take some of the more boring aspects of the game to them, and then basically gives some of the better spots to the new guys. So I also think that's one of the reasons that in Denmark, when new guys come out, they usually do so well, because it isn't just valde, it's every Danish new player that's being brought into a top team that's doing well. It's obviously most of the credit has to go to the players because they're the ones who perform. But I also think that the Danish teams are really good at like instantly putting up their new players in star player spots.
Yeah. No, you make a very good point there, because actually that's something historically that I always used to... It's one of the reasons, to give a CSGO example, of why I'm not surprised so many players actually haven't wanted to join NIP, because the kind of the rep in that team is like, well, Get Right and Forest aren't going to give up their spot, you know. So if you join that team, you better not play any spot they want to play, because that's the way that things used to run in 1.6. You're right, you know, like the veterans have their spots. And this is one of the reasons, kind of to tie it back in, as to why when I looked at the Team X lineup, I didn't expect much, because I looked at it and I was like, okay, we've got MODDII, we've got Friis. Traditionally, you'd think these guys are going to do the same thing. Like, listen, I'm a veteran. I used to be a very good player. You know, I'm going to take these things here, these things. You can do this over here. You know, like you can try and show that you're good in this role here, and then maybe if you're really, really good at that, we can figure something out later. You know, so one of the things I have to say about valde that's interesting is, again, if he was just some mad fragger, then it might not matter what team he plays on. You know, maybe you could do that on any team. You know, you could just headshot people. There's players who were like that. But it's when I saw him go, and he was the stand-in for Dignitas at the ECS finals at the end of last year, because Magix couldn't attend for whatever reason. I think he had like school exam or something. And when he came into this lineup, I remember thinking like, oh, right, is he going to be amazing here? And actually, he kind of struggled, I have to say. Like, he had a lot of issues. So when I looked at that, I didn't go, oh, must just be a terrible player. That usually tells me, like, this guy's very comfortable in the system he plays in when he's in his other team, though. Like, this, because if you can't just be thrown into a superstar spot in some other team you never played in, you know. So what do you think in terms of Heroic? What is, like, the philosophy for how you use specific players? Like, if you talk about the current lineup, how are you thinking about these different players and what role they're going to play and how to use them best?
We're actually trying to figure that out right now because we have to make some adjustments. After we brought in Nico, we basically never had any good practice because when we brought in Nico, we had 5 tournaments in a row, so we were off for like 40 days straight. Then afterwards, we had some minor issues, and at the end, it ended up with Yugi joining instead of Friis. So I believe that we still have to sort out the roles, but I suppose that the way it's going to go is that valde and MODDII are going to play Lurk. Me and Nico will play map control, and then Nico will get more responsibility to like try and mid-round call. And because right now it's basically me calling, and then valde will sometimes give inputs about like the side that he's going against. So, and MODDII as well. But I mean, I think that we need to try to make Nico and Yugi more responsible mid-round. Because the thing is, I don't know if you noticed, but Nico has the most insane aim ever. So, I mean, if he can like evolve and try to take more responsibility, he's going to be one of the best players in the world. So we will try to see if we can make that happen. And yeah, I suppose that's the way we're going to do it, that Yugi and Nico will try to take more responsibility, and then MODDII and valde will keep playing the lurk roles.
Okay. So when you say that, okay, that MODDII was playing the lurk role, I remember I saw some interview, I forget who exactly it was with, where they talked about this, or it was mentioned on Twitter or something. I forget exactly the source, okay, but when they talked about MODDII playing this role, they said something like someone had like given him some tips in the team on how to do it or how to switch it up. Because actually, if anyone who followed 1.6, MODDII was the entry player. You know, like this was a guy where depending on which site he's going, okay, you don't think so?
Yeah, but I think the thing is, MODDII is still an entry fragger.
Okay.
In 1.6, he played the exact same role as he does now. He went alone towards a side. But the thing is, if his team went into that side, he would go in first every single time. Okay. And he still does that for us. If we play overpass and he goes towards B, he will be the first guy in every single time. Okay. So you can say that the thing is, in our team, I mean, the lurk role is also an entry fragger role, if you can say that. And the same goes for valde. If we are going to A on Mirage, he will be one of the guys going out first. So being the lurk isn't necessarily a role that you can't entry in, so to say.
Okay, right. And is that just a philosophy across the team?
In 1.6. Yeah, I think that's at least what we will try to do now is we'll try to put up the roles like more specific when we have set executes. Like then it will usually be actually MODDII and valde probably going in, MODDII, valde, or me going in first, depending on. In most of our executes, I'm throwing nades, so a lot of the times it can't be me, but then it will be valde or MODDII going in first. But that's really, I think, some role you can define roles, but you can't really define them that specific because when you play the lurk, you have to be able to enter as well.
Okay. So when you guys really broke out in Heroic, I mean, one of the first instances that really shocked everyone was this Power-LAN, which was just a domestic Danish LAN, but it had Astralis there. And this is like the real Astralis, you know, with Carrigan, Device, Zipnix, you know, all those players. And Dignitas admittedly had AZ as a stand-in instead of Reno, which people now will be like, well, that's an amazing team. But that was like a pure stand-in, you know. He was still in phase at the time. And you managed to beat both these teams in Best of 3 series. Like, how did the team go from being like I mean, your okay team before that as Team X to already, you know, showing some potential? What do you think happened?
I think that that's actually what we will try to achieve now by getting a lot of practice, because I think we have a more skilled lineup now than back then. But we had like a month where we had to sort out our problems in game. We got to make new strategies we still use. We got to create our play style, which switch up. Me and when I joined the team at first, it was our coach Hester calling, and then Glaive being the like secondary caller. So I was playing Lurk, and Valde would be playing map control. But we had to switch me and Valde all of our positions up. Then later on, we also switched the fact that I was going to be in-game leading. So there were a lot of stuff there that we changed up in that period of time. And I believe all of those changes eventually made us... It created a play style that everyone was comfortable in, and it created a play style where we were... I suppose we were unpredictable because most of our tactics could be done in several different ways.
Even though at the time this was kind of when people considered Astralis in their slump, you know, the thing about that team is I always used to tell people, even if they're doing badly now, you look at the names on paper and you're like, this should still be an amazing team, you know. That's why in a weird way, it's actually not that crazy that Glaive joined in and they're the best team, you know. Was it kind of surreal to be able to beat the real lineup in a best of 3 on LAN?
No, not really, actually. I think at that point we crushed everyone in practice. So we weren't really surprised that we won a lot of those games.
Who is everyone? You were actually playing like tier 1 all the time in practice as well?
I mean, obviously also lose in practice, but sometimes you kind of get when you're playing in a lineup, you know that if you do like really well in practice, it will usually, not always, but usually transition. And at that point, after we had our boot camp and we had the switch up in roles, we actually started to like really crush some opponents in practice, and also some Taiwan opponents. So it wasn't really that we were that surprised that we did good against those teams. We were actually expecting us to do. We weren't expecting to win the event, but we certainly thought that it was a possibility. We felt that we were just as big favorites as both Dignitas and Astralis.
So one of the interesting things about this period of time, like just basically in the lead up to when Glaive left in October, is that from this Power-LAN up to when Glaive left, you had a tournament, a LAN, like almost a week apart, like 5 LANs in a row. I mean, 2 of them were Danish ones, you know, but this schedule is ridiculous. So you're saying about getting out of practice and setting the roles and stuff. Now, sure, you kept the lineup the same, so that's fine, but isn't it difficult if you break out as an underdog like this to actually improve and maintain the results? Because if you break out as an underdog and you do well, especially if you upset a big team, people are going to study you even more at the next tournament, you know. So if you're playing a tournament every week, like, was it difficult to try and change things up or to tweak things? What was it like this run?
Yeah, when we had Glaive, I think we had the time beforehand, before all of those events, that we could actually. It wasn't really that big of a problem, I believe. It was a problem after Glaive left, but when me and Glaive were both there, we had a like really good duo of in-game leading, and also the fact that we had a really good foundation built. So for us at that point, it wasn't really a struggle. But when we got in Nigo, it certainly was a struggle because we didn't have the time to put in a new player into Nigo. We had to switch up. The first thing is we had to switch up some spots in order to get in Nigo because we wanted to make him feel comfortable. That also meant that some other players had to play totally new spots. Also, our structure was different because Nigo would be taking map control with me, but he would do it in like a different way that Glaive were doing. I would try to like put him into the same role, but at some maps it simply wouldn't work because it didn't feel comfortable. So then I would take Glaive's spots and put him in mine. So we didn't have enough practice with Nigo to do all those events we did with him, but with Glaive it wasn't a problem.
Okay, so in that case, if this is something I've always wondered about in CSGO, actually. So one of the things people complained about a lot in the era when we started to get lots of tournaments like 2015, 2016, is a lot of pros who come from 1.6 used to complain that like, oh, you never get any practice. Because they used to practice, meaning, you know, you go home, you have your days off to recover, then you do normal practice on the internet, you know. If you're in this kind of a cycle where, I mean, before Glaive left, again, you're doing like a tournament every week. After he left, you did, again, another ridiculous run of like tournament every week, like hardly any time between. Did you develop some kind of a system to be able to actually like study demos, come up with tactics that while you're on the road? Is this something you had to do?
Sorry, in 1.6 or no?
No, in CSGO now. Like in this, if you've got a tournament almost every week, did you have to change it so that like, sure, you're not scrimming directly, but you're doing like practice at events, or you're reviewing the demos at events, or you come up with tactics at events?
Practice rooms at the events. So if there are practice rooms and we got a chance to practice, we would usually do that. Also, when I had the chance and a computer to like study demos, I would do it. It's gotten a lot easier now with the programs you can actually use for it, so you don't necessarily have to have CSGO in order to study opponents. But yeah, we did study our opponents at some of the events. At format that were just here, like in best of one, where you're facing 5 teams in a day, that can actually be pretty hard because you can usually end up on 4 maps actually against the opponents, maybe 3 maps. So you would have to counter like 15, maybe 20 different maps, and you can't really only watch one demo if you want to counter. So that will basically mean you had to watch like 30 or 40 demos, which wouldn't be possible for a player to do. So usually if we had like at the Northern event, we would like simply counter Liquid when we faced them. I knew that Pimp would be playing alone in Matrix, so I just called 3 times in a row that smoke up mid and run up mid, and that worked every time because he was playing alone on A. Those are the counters you can do when you don't have that many matches, and you usually know which map you're going to end up on.
Okay. So when Glaive left the team and he went off to Astralis, like as you kind of referenced here, like even though you had all these tournaments, I mean, you had like veterans, you had the same lineup for quite a while, so things get set, you know, you get all the basics set, and then you can work on advanced stuff, you know, and figure out. But if you bring in a guy, I mean, Nico, obviously, again, someone you're just plucking almost out of nowhere, you know, hasn't played at the top level, and then you have to go to tournament after tournament after tournament. Was this a situation where, like, did you worry for the team? Like, our level will go down or will struggle? Because obviously you did it these first couple of events.
Yeah, we definitely struggled. I knew that Nico was a better individual player than Glaive. But the thing is that Glaive brought something that was like that no one else on the team could replace or Nico could replace. So we struggled a lot. It's always hard to bring in a new player, but it's even harder to replace a player that brings qualities that's irreplaceable, so to speak. So the help that he were able to provide me with, that's something I surely miss.
So what have you been able to do then in that sense? Because like you say, like this is something where a lot of teams in history, I mean, in 1.6, unfortunately, just because maybe someone didn't do an interview and say it, sometimes people didn't know unless like literally someone got the word out there that, you know, you'd have a secondary caller in a team who, this is why they're useful, you know, like, yeah, the main caller calls the majority of the time, but every now and then that guy comes up with that little idea that maybe wins you a key round or changes something, you know, notices something that the main caller then uses as information. If that guy then leaves, how's the process been for you? I mean, essentially, it's just all on you at this point, right?
Yeah, gotten a lot more to that point. I mean, what Glaive was really good at, which I weren't when I was calling, and something that I have to learn and get better at, is like doing adjustments. I usually have a pretty good idea of which things can work, but for an example, we played against Double Orb, and I was maybe a round or two too slow to adjust to that. And that's something I need to work on, which I think Glaive was better at than me. So that's where I could use him.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
Because the thing is, when you guys first broke out in Heroic and you were having these upsets, Like the funny thing is, the problem is a lot of fans only remember like the one big upset. Okay, so whatever map that's on, people think, right, that's the really good map. So I remember people thought that like Cobblestone or whatever. But the first map I noticed you guys winning on was Nuke, actually, because you were one of the teams who was really early to adopt that map, and you were getting wins against the top teams on it. Back when, you know, most of the teams actually just banned it or as a result, didn't even expect the opponent to pick it. Like, do you think that teams understood that you were good on Nuke? 'Cause it seemed like people let you have it a lot of times.
No, I don't think people understood it. But the thing is, our map pool back then really suffered in best of Friis because we didn't like playing Cash and Dust 2.
Yeah.
So the thing is, now it's really different because, I mean, people let us play Nuke, but they also knew that back then our train was actually pretty good. We could play Mirage. Our overpass was probably the best map back then. And then Cobble was also when we played Cobble online and in practice, we weren't doing good. But every time we played it on LAN, we won. So that wasn't a bad map either. So we had like 5 maps that we could play, which I think all of them, maybe not Mirage, but at least the 4 other maps were quite good for us actually. And then we had 2 maps that we couldn't play. So when we went into a best of 3 series, if people picked us 2 or Cash, we knew that we were probably going to lose that map. We didn't even believe that we could win it. And the most stupid thing is we kept trying to get good on Dust 2 because in Copenhagen Wolves, Dust 2 was our best map with me and Glaive. But we just couldn't transition that map into Heroic. We couldn't make that map good. I don't know why. So we kept trying that instead of maybe trying Cash. We just permabanned Cash. We didn't even try to play it. And that was a big mistake. We should have tried to get good on Cash instead of like playing Dust 2 so much. Because I believe that with practice we could have got good on Cash, but we just wasted so much time trying to integrate Dust 2 into our map pool, and it basically never worked out for us. Okay. So the thing about this change that they removed Dust 2 is actually, it's the best thing that could happen for us, because this basically makes our map pool really strong.
Sure. So one of the interesting things when you reference overpass here is that, okay, so the nuke one's obvious because not a lot of teams were playing it, you know, and obviously I also have to figure myself, just to be a bit cynical, they probably thought, if they thought they were a much better team than you, like, oh, it's okay for them to pick nuke, you know, maybe we can still beat them on it, or maybe we just win the decider anyway. But the difference is, being really good on Cobblestone, like, as good as it is, the problem is a lot of teams played Cobblestone. So, you know, there's some really good teams out there that love that map, you know. So it's going to be still hard to get wins. So to me, that's why Overpass was the key, because outside of Denmark, until very recently, most teams don't like Overpass and still didn't back then. Like, they wouldn't ban it outright, so they'd let it be in the pool, you know. But there's not that many teams like that's, except for maybe like, okay, SK Gaming, Navi. There's not that many really liked it. But I've noticed bizarrely, not only is your team good on it, it's like every Danish team seems to love Overpass and seems to have really good T-side strats. Do you have a theory as to why this is? What do you like about the map?
I think that whenever a Danish team is good and is doing a good have a good playstyle on a map, the other Danish team will steal their ideas that they have. So that's probably why a lot of the maps in Denmark are quite similar. At least I know that both us, Astralis, North, all of us are quite good on both nuke and overpass. So I believe that one of the reasons is that people just, if I see another Danish team like do really well on a map, I'll usually go and check out why are they so good on this map, and I'll try to copy some of it. And I think that's why Overpass got so good, because actually it's really a simplistic way that the Danish teams play Overpass. Obviously you have some good B executes and you have some ways to execute on the A side, but the map control itself is really, it's one of the hardest and easiest maps at the same time to take map control of, because there's so much space that you need to get, but it's actually quite easy to get that space in a quite secure way. And I think that most of the Danish teams realized how to do that with minimal risk on the T side.
Okay, so I have a question about this, okay, because one of the things that I love about watching Overpass games when Danish teams play is that it seems like, I have to say this as an outsider, I obviously don't know what it's like in the teams, but it seems like every Danish team has a whole bunch of really good full utility executes onto the B site, like really fast ones where you throw all your smokes and mollies and you just rush the site completely. And the thing is, obviously, even if that was amazing as an execute, if you did it like 10 rounds out of 15 on T side, the team will obviously, the CTs will just stack 3 or 4 people there, and then it's going to be way less effective. So then it's obviously very, very hard to do those slow executes onto A. So it feels like the dynamic is every really good Danish team tries to balance out how often they do the super slow execute onto A, that you hold the CTs there, you make them try and like fight for every little bit of map, and then you're just trying to figure out when you can get away with doing the B execute, and the B execute is going to win you tons of... What is your guys' philosophy on the T side in that sense?
The thing is, on overpass, I actually think that overpass might be the only map where it's an advantage for the CT to trade, because the rotate. I mean, usually you will play 2 or 3 guys on either B or A, and usually it will be the B side that you play like 3 guys in the start of the round because they can't get to the A side fast enough. But the rotations are so fast between the sides that even, I mean, when we execute on B, we usually expect that there's going to be 3 guys on B, because you have to, most of the time, if you want to do a B execute, you have to take short control, and when you get short control, the backup player on overpass is usually going to stay on upper or even on B at some point. So, I mean, the way that the B executes are made is we expect there to be 3 CTs, but even if there is 3 CTs, the smokes and molotovs and flashes are just gonna like destroy them. That's the purpose of it. So usually we will I think most teams will play the standard, and whenever they think that the CTs are getting too scared of that standard, so they are maybe trying to stack like 3 guys on A, trying to shut that map control down, that's when the B executes work even better, because then there's only 2 CTs on B. And if you're only 2 CTs on playing B side on overpass, you're really going to struggle on a B execute.
Okay. So I notice actually that one of the interesting things is, you had like a good cobblestone at times. Like I said before, though, obviously it's not going to look as good contrasted to the other maps because a lot of top teams played it at the time. But actually, this is one of the maps where, with this newer lineup, like since you got Nico, obviously you've only had Juggy for one event. I noticed that cobblestone's really starting to get even stronger for you guys. It feels like now this is the team where, that's a map where I pick you guys to upset a bunch of teams. What's good about cobblestone in the Nico era? I mean, people often credit, you're saying he's this amazing aimer. It feels like he's doing a really good job in terms of the B entries.
The thing is, our cobble is not about the T side at all. We always struggled on the T side on cobble, and I actually think that if the way we win cobble is always on CT. Always. We never win on T. So what we are basically trying to do is gather a lot of CT rounds, and then afterwards we're going to have to try and hope that our T side can bring us through, because we never really practiced the map enough to do some I think good some good cobble executes. And it's also really hard to do B executes now that they made the stairs, because the reason why cobble was so T-sided before was because the CTs couldn't gather info on B. So you never knew when the B hit was going to go. So you played 4 guys on B and one guy on A, and now you play 2 guys on A and 3 guys on B. And the difference really is that no matter how much you try as a terrorist, you can't stop the CTs from getting to that stairs, doing 1 flash and getting all the information. So you can't do those 6. Before you could just, what you would see Fnatic do is you would see every single round Olofmeister would throw a smoke and just go out plat, because the CTs couldn't stop it, and that was the issue with Cobble before, and that's why it was so T-sided. So while he was doing that, 4 guys could stand and line up the best smokes in the world, the best Molotov, the best flashes, and then you could just do a B execute where it was close to impossible to hold it. So that's not a thing anymore, and I think a lot of teams are struggling to make, after teams found out how easy it is now to shut down those B executes, throwing a early utility and then basically gathering info on B long. That's when I think a lot of teams are actually struggling right now, because you have to find a new way to gather those easy T rounds. And before, you would just have 2 or 3 B executes and you could get 12 T rounds, no problem.
Yeah. So this is actually one of the reasons why I remember back when they first removed Inferno, I was one of the first people who was like, can they just remove this fucking cobblestone map? Because I used to watch the pro game, and even if you had 4 CTs covering the B site, they could just hit the B site like 10 rounds out of 15, and they'd probably still win the half, you know. So to me, that was like, this is broken if you can do that, you know. You can't, like, there shouldn't be a map where you know which site they're going to hit, and you can even overload it, and you still can't hold. But the interesting thing is, if you remember, they added those stairs. I think it was around like the summer, or maybe just after the summer. So it was actually a while ago they added the stairs. But from what you're saying here, did teams just not figure out initially on the CT side how to use the stairs to do this? Is this the thing? Because at the time, you know, people were still very T-sided, right?
I think so. As soon as the stairs went in, our CT sides would probably be 10 rounds on average. Because the thing is, A isn't such an easy side to hold either. So playing one guy on A was also, the thing is, when you had to play 4 guys on B, playing one guy on A, it was also really easy to hit A. But now it's not, you can't really hit an easy side anymore on cobblestone. There's not those easy rounds that you would just gather before. So I believe that at first you would still, when the stairs were implemented, you would still see like the B plat player try to go out B plat every round. And the CTs at first probably didn't adjust. Some teams probably did, but some certainly didn't. And I think that teams are right now starting to figure out how to play that. I think they already did some time ago, but I think the B plat is certainly the key to having a good CT side, because that means you can stack on A and drop.
So now that we actually have, I mean, for you, you're saying it's CT sided for you as a map. Okay, taking that into account, is it actually a better map now? Like is it still broken in any way?
I think that if they were like to make the map better, they should maybe open up the space above when you're at T and you come in like in the, we call it Dragon Law, and then the area before you go into drop.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could maybe try to open up the skyboxes there. Because there's a roof right now, so you can't really. The thing is, it's really hard to do B executes now. But yeah, it certainly it certainly is a better map now. I think that the best maps are the CT-sided maps usually. So I think there's still not. I think some of the things that people are saying that you don't have opportunities on Cobble is quite wrong, because I mean it's the same on train. You have even less opportunities, I feel like. Because in Cobble, on A, you got so much space to work with as CT that the terrorists have to take. Like you have the first room in Matrix, second room, third room, stairs, and then down mid. And even then, you still have a lot of room to work with on A. So that's basically where you have to take map control. And I feel like on train, you get the map control instantly. You can just like throw one flash on inner and molly upper, and then just rush down early, and then you got map control on train. So I don't necessarily think that Cobble is a bad map. I surely think it was before they made the stairs, but after they really implemented the stairs, I think it's a map that isn't as bad as people say. I think people are like still holding a grudge against the map because it was so bad before, and it was really bad before.
Yeah. So, okay, if since you're so confident in your CT side on Cobble, who is the team who has the hardest T side to contain on Cobblestone? Who's the toughest for you guys to play?
It's hard to say, but I always feel like I don't really know actually. We haven't played a lot of Cobble lately, so yeah, it's actually really tough to say. I suppose it might be teams who mix up like fast-paced stuff, going fast mid and fast B, into like a more strat execute heavy style. Maybe something like versus pro or something, I suppose. But I mean, Cobble is a lot about economy as well, because when you play B side, Valde and Nico feels like it's the easiest thing in the world to shut down B stuff when they got utility. So we always try to have enough money that they can shut down those executes, and then we can play 2 or 3 guys on a lot of the times. So it's actually a tough question because we haven't played a lot of Cobble lately, so I can't really answer that.
Okay. So something you touched on earlier is a really interesting kind of like, it's a subtle point that people won't necessarily understand unless they look into it. But when your team first started causing all these upsets, okay, and it usually be in the best of ones, you know, you'd get some like really great upset on, like as you said, overpass, or could be nuke, whatever it might be. When teams get upsets, people think, right, well, they're a better team than I expected. So for example, if you like Heroic, if you can upset Astralis or you can upset Dignitas, right, well, then you should definitely win this like tier 2 LAN. And then you don't win the tier 2 LAN, people are going to think like, oh, right, they just weren't that was a fluke, you know, they weren't as good. But the thing is, I remember looking into it, and what you said now makes perfect sense. Like, since you didn't play Cash and you were terrible on Dust 2, like, if you get to a best of 3, logically, you're going to lose any series in which they can just play one of those maps and then have that. And then secondly, even if you get a favorable opponent, you know, like an opponent that matches up well against you, they can just play something like Cobblestone as the third map. And if they're really good on Cobblestone, they can still win the series this way. But the thing is, the reason why I always called your team like a really good upset team, though, is there's a lot of teams that are in like tier 2 where they're just a worse version of tier 1 teams. You know, they're decent on this map, this map, this map. They have good players, but not as good. And the problem with that sort of team is that sort of team won't even get upsets, because even in the best of 1, they're just going to be a slightly worse version. Now, this is the question I have at the moment. So there is no Dust 2 now, but I still see I still think there's like a bridge, there's a gap that you have to close, okay, which is if you go to a best of 3 now with Heroic, okay, sure, there's no Dust 2, but you've still got the problem that you're amazing on those 3 maps. Overpass, Nuke, Cobble, that's really great. But again, if you think about the way a best of 3 series works, okay, so let's say the opponent doesn't play Overpass, so he can just ban Overpass. Now you can pick a map, okay, maybe you pick Nuke, maybe he's not good on that. You pick Nuke, you might even be able to win this. The problem is, unless he plays Cobblestone, he's just going to ban that second rotation, and you're going to end up again on Train, Mirage, whatever it might be. Is there still a gap to where Heroic's going to be winning best of 3 series against these top teams?
I believe that we are going to be like improving on that a lot. I think that one of the maps that you underrate a lot for Heroic is actually Train. When we used to play Train with Glaive, it was one of our best maps. It maybe didn't look that way. I don't know. I don't remember if we played it on a lot of unofficials, but we were actually really, really good on Train. So I think that the fact that people haven't figured out Inferno yet, so Inferno is really good to get up to. I mean, one of the things with Inferno is if you just put in the work, it's going to be quite easy, I believe, to get good on that map, because other teams won't like be amazing on it yet. So we will have the benefit of being able to play Inferno now. And if we get like just decent or good on Inferno, and we have Train as well, then we have 5 like really good maps, and Mirage is like a hit or miss for us. So I actually believe that this benefited us a lot more than what people might think, because Otters 2 was like seriously terrible. When we played Power-LAN and we won that, in both of the best of 3s, we played Dignitas and Astralis, and we lost those 2. And we even knew going into those maps that we were going to lose it. And I think we lost them 16-4 and 16-3. We got like straight out crushed on those 2. We were so bad on it. So I actually believe, and also in the match against Astralis, I believe that we showed that we, even without practice, we actually know how to play Train. It wasn't that we got crushed at all. If we had won like one of those they win an anti-ego where Kirby like walks out in a T quad and then CT quad, where Yogi has been spotting with all for like 30 seconds, and then the second he goes away, Kirby comes in that line and ends up shooting 2 people in the back on an eco, and we would have forced them to like be on full eco if we won that. And if we win that round, I think we actually win Train. So Train isn't that bad for us as people might think.
Okay, so this is another detail that's interesting. I think actually separates your team from the other teams that like for example, when like Tyloo was coming up, okay, Sure, if people play them on cobblestone, maybe they could have an upset. But if people just avoid it, they're going to have a big struggle. So that philosophy of just hoping you get your best map, it's not a very good philosophy if you want to be a top team. So one of the interesting things I noticed early on about your team, though, is actually when you went into best of 3 series, you didn't just hope that you got onto your favourite map. Actually, you seemed to pick the map depending on what you thought the opponent was weak on, like actual logical pick ban. Like I saw you pick train a couple of times in best of 3 series. And I noticed, again, you were very early to adopt nuke. So is this kind of passing over then to Inferno? Because obviously a way if you're a team that doesn't have the best players in the world to get really good is if you embrace the new map while other people are doing, like it looks like at the moment some people are using Inferno like they did nuke, where it's like we'll just ignore it for 3 months and we'll wait until we have to play it, you know.
I actually think this lineup is going to be like a top team in the world. I think people really underrate the fact that Yugi and Nigo is like seriously good players. I think they're going to prove people wrong if they think Heroic is just going to stay as a lower tier team, because people might think that valde is like our only star player, but those two guys are star players, and we are going to adopt Inferno for sure, and actually we're going to start like heavy practice on that map today. So I think if we get Inferno into our map pool, we have a really strong map pool, even for best of Friis. And I think what people are going to see soon enough is that Yugi and Nigo is actually like amazing players.
Okay. So one of the things that I noticed that was also quite interesting about your team is it's same as Epsilon. You guys both took like all these opportunities to go over to China and try and win what I call like free money. Like I'm actually surprised some other like tier 2 NA team didn't go over and do this, because in theory there's all these lands over there where, like, you know, first place might be like 30 grand, 50k, but you're only playing like Vici, Cybers then and stuff. What has the experience been like doing that? Because it must be weird, because none of the other top Western teams ever go into these lands. You know, they don't even know they exist, it seems.
In both events we attended, we actually thought there were going to be 1 or 2 top teams. More than what there weren't really any top teams at either of the events. I mean, Tyloo were there at one of the events, but that was it. So we actually thought that there were going to be more top teams at those events. I think it was a good experience for the team. It was a fun experience. It's a really different culture, but I think at the point where we are now, we want to be the best in the world. So the thing is, we want to focus more on trying to beat the best and being in the best competitions. I know for a lot of people this is probably going to sound like I'm delusional into what this team is capable of, but in 1.6 and CSGO, this is the best team I ever played on. I mean, when I watch my teammates now, I'm amazed about how good they actually are, and I believe that this team is going to beat out the Danish teams.
Okay. They're going to beat North and Astralis. I mean, Astralis is the best team in the world. How are you going to do that?
I believe that the talent in this lineup is so underrated at the moment. I mean, this isn't just best of 1 series, I believe. I think we can, if we work and if we try to get I mean, okay, it might be a stretch to say that we're going to get better than Astralis right now, but I do believe that this team is going to be a top team in the world.
Okay. So I saw the interview you did with Launders, where you actually said in it, like, you weren't cheering for North to beat Immortals. Like, you really don't care in that sense. And what's funny is, a lot of people would hear that and be shocked, because this is the bad part about the age of Twitter, is that on Twitter, players have learned how you get fans, right? And what you do is, if you want all the Swedish fans to support you and you're a NIP player, then when you go out the tournament and Fnatic's still in, you put a tweet like, yeah, cheering for Fnatic in this next game, really hope they win. And what people don't know is, sure, some of these players might have like a friend in the other team. Maybe they want him to win, you know. But most of those teams behind the scenes, they secretly hope that team from their country loses. They don't want them to do better than them and be further in tournament. So this is just honesty, right?
Yeah, that's true. I just said straight out honest that the thing is, I want my team to be the best team, not in Denmark, but I wanted it to be the best in the world and the best in Denmark. And the way to get that, and I think that right now we are in a situation where where people ain't gonna steal any more players from us. So the only way to like manage that is by beating them. And yeah, as general, I just hope that the other Danish teams perform worse than us. And
Okay.
it might sound like ridiculous to some people, but the thing is, I don't like hope for the worst for them personally. I like in the personal life, I hope for the best for like all of them. But when it comes to CS, I just hope they lose, and that's just honest.
Sure. Okay, so here's the problem though, right? Is that in the past, okay, people would have said, I mean, you're kind of saying here, you see like Yugi and Nico are going to become star players. So in the past, people would immediately say like, well, come on, Snappi, like, how is your team going to be better than Config and Magix and AZ? How are they going to be better than Dupree and Kirby and Device? So if that's going to happen on one level, it can't just be Valde, right? It has to be Yugi and Nico. These guys have to become some of the best in the world.
Yep, and I think that that's actually where people underrate both Yugi and Nico, because I actually feel like they got the potential to be some of the best players in the world. And not only potential, I think they're going to show it like real soon.
Okay, so in what respect for Yugi then? Because he's the guy we've barely seen. You know, like we've seen some of Nico and his development as you get comfortable in the team. But what type of player is Yugi going to be? Like, can you give us like a reference point? Is there another AWPer that you think he's going to have a style like or similar skill set?
I actually think that he's a really smart AWPer, but also an aggressive AWPer. So he don't die a lot, but he get a lot of first picks. I don't know. I suppose maybe like when Guardian was like really good. Still, I mean, he still is, but not at the same point he were in like 2015 or 16.
Yeah.
Guardian did get a lot of picks, and he didn't get picked off a lot. So I think Yugi is that type of player that like we can make him take shots on whatever part of the map we want him to take a shot at, he can do it. And that's really a big strength, because if we struggle to hold a spot down, we can ask Yugi to come and just try and lock it down with the AWP, get a pick, smoke him off, get him away, and then we're 5-on-4. And that's really like the type of player that he is. He's really strong in clutches as well. And as an AWPer, it's really important to be like strong in clutch situations, because you usually won't go in first. So you're often gonna end up in like situations where you're 2-on-3, 1-on-3, 1-on-2, stuff like that. And he really excels in those kind of situations. And he's just he's actually like, he really surprised me. Nico said that we needed to get Yugi if we wanted to be like one of the best teams. And after we got him, I was like so surprised about how good he actually was.
Okay, so if that's part one, right, you have to have the players who can match up, you know, basically you have to be able to get the frags, you know, you can call the best strat in the world. If you can't get the kills, you're not going to win the round. But there's another component to this, which is now everyone acknowledges Glaive's amazing and Astralis. MSL's always actually been quite highly rated for the last year or so. So Snappi's going to be a better in-game leader than these guys?
I think, I'm not going to say that I'm a better in-game leader than those guys, but the thing is, I feel like this is the first time I actually got the talent and the aimers and the people to actually work with, that I have a chance to actually prove that I can be just as good an in-game leader as those guys, because this is the first time where I feel like I can match Astralis and North in firepower.
Okay. Right, but here's the problem though. I mean, you already touched on it before, but you didn't say much about it. So the problem is, and this is where MSL's life used to be for the last year and a half, which is, let's say you did it right. Let's say you actually became better than Astralis. Yeah. Well, then we all know what used to happen if you were Dignitas is if you had got anywhere close, then, you know, Valde's going to go and join their team, or they're going to take whichever one comes up. So why is that not going to happen this time? Are you really convinced?
Yeah, but the thing is, if you make contracts so that can happen, then it's not going to happen. And the thing is, if everyone in our team believes in what I do, and I know they do, then we can like make an agreement so that it won't happen.
Okay.
Like in terms of contract.
Sure. So one of the questions I have then going forwards is, now people are going to actually like give Heroic some respect. Okay, they're going to say, okay, yeah, they can do something. Like they had this big run at Katowice, etc. When you look at the future for your team, what areas actually can improve? Because in theory, this is another thing that's a bit unique about your team, is that since you have the setup with Heroic and the investment, etc., it's not really like being the third best team in most countries. If you're the third best team in a lot of other countries, except maybe NA, you know, you're not going to have like resources, you're not going to have a place to boot camp, you probably can't even go to all the lands, you know. And so I can understand why those teams, they have like almost like a resource disadvantage to even get to compete with the other teams. In theory, your team has all these things. So at the moment, it's just literally on what you do in the server, how you practice, etc. What is the gap now if you've really got the players between you and the Astralis and the North and the other elite teams in the world? What has to be made up?
I think one of the biggest things for us right here at the start is that we still haven't had any practice. When we went into Katowice, we had zero practice basically, because we had officials every day from Monday to Sunday, PO3 and the ECS qualifiers, which went on all day, so we didn't have any time to practice. I think it's important here at the start that we like stay humble enough that we know that we can still lose to those like tier 3, tier 4 teams if we do badly, because we don't have the structure yet, so that we should be able to grind it out no matter what happens. Like if 3 guys have a bad day, we can still lose to those teams. And I think that we have to be able to like respect the fact that we are not there yet. So even if we are going to lose to like teams that are ranked below us, and that's probably going to happen, then we need to like stay focused on putting into practice, putting in structure into the team. And at that point, I think that we are going to reach our goals. I do believe that if we have enough time, that we are going to get there. I'm actually pretty convinced of that.
Okay, I have a question for you about North and Astralis. I want to get your take on this, because something I've noticed that's different about the two teams is actually like their economic philosophy in the game of when they buy and when they save seems quite different, because actually Astralis has become amazingly with Glaive, like amazing at doing these force buy rounds. Like they can just buy Tech 9 and armor and win against the best teams in the world. Whereas actually MSL, I haven't seen almost anyone do this in CSGO. He seems to be doing these rounds where he actually does like pure saves. He'll do like 2 of them in a row to get full economy, get everything back again. And obviously those are like 2 totally opposite philosophies on how to play the game. What do you actually think of that MSL approach? 'Cause I've heard some people are critical of it and think like in CS, you know, you kind of have to gamble. You have to gamble in CSGO, you have to force buy, you have to hope that you can win with pistols, you know. What is your philosophy on it? What do you think?
I think I got the same philosophy as Glaive. Me and him used to force buy all the time when we played together. So I believe that from an economical aspect, it's always better to force, do one good force. Because the thing is, if you do those 2 ecos, you're still going to have some players that buys double deagle, no armor. And then it's basically like useless doing them. So I would rather want one full force where you maybe win the round and break the opponent, or you take enough of those UMPs and stuff like that away, and then they will usually buy MP9s in order to farm up like cash, which is like a bad decision usually, I believe, or they will buy M4. So you will keep them on a low economy by doing this force, even if you lose. So I believe that force is almost always, if you have like a plan as terrorist and also as a CT, I do believe that on most maps it is the right approach to do. There is some maps where you need utility to shut down a site early on, as I said, cobblestone for an example. So you usually won't see maybe Nico and Valde, at least not, maybe not. One of them will probably buy down if we do a force in the second round, but the other one will probably just buy a deagle in order to have full utility for the fourth round. But I do believe that even if you don't win the round, you'll usually have made enough economical damage in order to make it a success.
Okay. So okay, here's the question. With your team going forwards, like you described this aspect of the economical component and how you're thinking about the game and the force buy aspect. But do you actually think, since you said that you actually hope those teams lose, just in the game, obviously, like not in life in general, okay? Like so in theory, hopefully, you're not biased. Like the problem is, if I ask some other people in an interview, it's almost a waste of time to ask them about the other teams in their country, because actually, like famously, even if they're the best team, they'll tell you that like, no, the third best team is really good as well. You know, they'll hype them up too much. So if you really are unbiased in this respect, or maybe you don't even care if they win or lose, let me get your prediction now, okay? Will this next 6 months or so, will it be the age of Astralis? Like, do they keep winning tournaments? Are they like the best team for the next 6 months? Overall, you know, they win the most titles, the most top fours? Or do you think another team does it? Does like Virtus Pro do it? Or the new Fnatic or G2 or something? What's your prediction? What's your gut tell you at the moment?
I mean, it's also to the point, first about other Danish teams losing. Astralis is actually a little bit different, but that's mostly because we've spent so much time together, so you can't really stop caring about a lot of their players. Okay. So, but that's really like I usually hope Danish teams lose. But the thing is, I don't believe Astralis can be as dominant as they are now, because I believe in order to have like a run like they have right now, you have to be like super skilled and like be amazing. But I also feel like you have to like be lucky to some extent, and that might sound like stupid because it isn't about luck or anything, but I mean, you have to have some marginals coming your way in order to do so amazing results. And I still believe Astralis might be the best team in the next 6 months, but I don't believe that they're going to be as dominant as they are right now.
Okay. Right, so to finish up the interview, is there any kind of like final message you have for everyone, or someone you want to thank or say hello to?
No, not really. Actually, I guess I could thank my team, and then that's really it. I just hope that we can grind out and meet the expectations we all got.
Okay. Tusen tak.
Yeah, tusen tak.